afternoon, and welcome to another edition of Unlock the Door Radio with your host, Michael Cross, here on UCY TV Productions. And before I get started on tonight's topic, or today's topic, depending on where you're at, I'd encourage people to check out my website at michaelcross.net, or recordings of past radio shows, and a few other things as well, on my YouTube channel at Michael Cross. Just type in Michael Cross into YouTube and you should be able to find it fairly quickly. Now, what I'd like to deal with today is the idea that it seems our society is too preoccupied with trying to weed out that which we do not like. And so be prepared, because in this show, I'm going to bash on every group imaginable, except for maybe libertarians, who seem to be at least consistent when it comes to issues of censorship and so forth. And I'm going to point out a lot of the hypocrisy that exists in, conservative religious groups, feminist governments, and just about everybody else when it comes to the and I almost said values of censorship, but I don't think there's any real values associated with censorship. Now, I remember, let's back up a little bit here. I remember when I was in high school, and for those of you who are either older Generation X or younger Generation Y, meaning that you went to school in America somewhere between, 1975 and 1985, you probably remember that was a time in which when you were in your social studies class, you got lessons on the First Amendment being a double-edged sword. Meaning that sometimes if you ban something, then it's going to come back later to get you. Or, the idea that sometimes it's better to let a controversial group, even if most people think they're despicable, or something in print media, for instance, pornography, that maybe it's better to let those kinds of things exist so that everything else can be protected as well. Because if you start allowing censorship, you start allowing the state to be able to determine what is and isn't right, what is and isn't to be seen by the public. Now, that's one of those issues I think that grates on everyone's nerves once in a while, because face it, we all see something that we feel like, I wish that was not there and I'd rather see it banned. Now, that's not to say that we would do it. It just means that there's a little part of us that feels like, well, I don't think that should be out there and something should be done about it. Now, the thing is, in a society that values freedom, that can become problematic. And ultimately, I suppose if you look at issues, and I'll go into this in more detail, in a capitalistic system or a free enterprise system, or at least that's what we have in theory in the United States and most of Europe, then people should be able to choose what they see and what they read and so forth in order, and if it has an audience, if there's a number of people that want to see it or read it or whatever, then it'll be generated. If not, who's going to want to see it? And, people would not really voluntarily go out and produce something and waste their time if they're totally rejected. Now, the thing is that a lot of this seems to have changed, this attitude of just letting people choose for themselves. That ethic seems to have changed in the last, I would say, since 2001. And again, I think the biggest event, and I'd say it's actually probably bigger than Pearl Harbor, at least in modern terminology, was 2000, the Twin Towers in 2001. And it seemed that people became a little uncomfortable with having too much freedom. And instead of, I don't even think shows like the X-Files could have made it if they had come out around 2001, the idea of conspiracies and so forth in the government, because everyone suddenly started cheering the government. It was kind of everyone get behind, at that time, George Bush, and everyone just kind of, whatever the government wants to do, let's do it, whether that was wars or the Patriot Act or a number of other things. And this mentality that's been growing, this unease with too much freedom, seems to be exasperated by the fact that our media constantly harps on fear. I don't know, maybe fear sells. The idea that if you whip the masses up to be scared all the time, then, well, it's kind of like, let me back up a little bit. I heard a term called weather porn. You're probably going, what in the heck is weather porn? First of all, it's not a young newscaster, taking all of her clothes off and doing the weather. It instead has to do with the fact that you can catch people's attention real fast by showing them disasters. So, most people live in an area where nothing much happens with the weather. I mean, it rains, the sun's out, the wind blows at a certain temperature, and pretty much you just watch the weather report to know whether you should take an umbrella with you, wear a coat, or take some sunscreen with you if you're going to go out and be outdoors. The thing is that to get things spicier, a lot of programs in the United States have found that people will watch the weather more if you show disasters. So, you might be talking about, well, it's going to be a clear and sunny day here, or it's going to, you talk about clear and sunny day, and then you show some horrible drought taking place somewhere in the world. Or, it's raining today, but hey, take a look at what's going on in Bangladesh. 1,000 people just got drowned in a flood. And that grabs people's attention. So those kinds of disasters really grab people. I remember a song back in the 80s, something about, it was a rock song, maybe it was titled Dirty Laundry or something like that. But, one of the parts of the lyrics was, it was basically mocking news and, infotainment. And it had something about, everyone likes to see, death, essentially. And it grabs their attention. And the thing is, that really is true. When people drive by an accident scene, they all slow down, not necessarily to slow down because the police are trying to direct traffic, but if you ever notice, watch in front of you, they all slow down to look over and see if maybe they get to see something of the results of that accident. The heads always poke out to look. People like that. That's just part of human nature. It's different. It's like, oh my gosh, maybe I'll never see an accident like this again. I don't know. But that seems to be, something that catches attention. So weather porn, it's certainly more exciting and interesting than, today it's going to be partly sunny and 65 degrees. Yeah, that's not exciting. Might as well just go make lunch or something, or dinner. Now, the thing is that fear also sells. Fear is great. They're coming to get you. Who knows who's going to come and get you. There's always threats. And, I read this thing. I was watching an interview one time, and it was talking about how everyone's scared that their children are going to be abducted in the United States, if they let them alone. In fact, it's gotten to the point now where we have extreme situations where people, letting their kids go down to the playground just a couple blocks away from home, unsupervised, and the police arrest the parents. Okay? This is how far it's gone. Pretty soon it's going to be like, oh, your kids are playing in your yard unsupervised. Oh, wait a minute. That's already happened where police have knocked on people's doors and warned them about letting their kids play in their yards unsupervised. I guess it's better to have your kids just, maybe taking some attention deficit disorder medications and plopping them in front of the TV set or video games and, keeping them indoors because you never know what can happen. You might go outside and, get stung by a bee. Or you might get a sunburn, oh my gosh, or something like that. The thing is this, that more children per year drown in mop bucket accidents. And we're talking about toddlers, it's very tragic, horrible, where they're just crawling along and mom's left the mop bucket out and they're just crawling along and they pull themselves up on the bucket and look inside, but their heads, the head to body ratio, the weight is quite a bit skewed towards the head, and sometimes they fall in head first and then drown. More kids die of that per year than die of being abducted and killed by a stranger. Now that's not to say abductions don't take place. But often that has to do with the statistics, how we play with statistics. I don't think most of us see a father who's lost custody of his kids or a mother who's lost custody of her kids taking their children either, in an apparent way of getting custody of their kids, and going into hiding with their children, or if it's just that they don't come back in time and maybe the custodial parent wants to make sure this is all recorded in the files to, use against them at a future date where they call in and say, well, my kid, they're not home yet. And that gets included in statistics. Statistics can freaking lie. Okay. One of the ones I really think is a big lie is when they talk about teen pregnancy. And, in a lot of places in the Midwest and so forth, it's not uncommon for women to get married just out of high school. That used to be common everywhere. And I guess it's still common in most of the United States, at least in rural or smaller suburban areas. But a lot of gals get married to their high school sweetheart or to, their husbands a couple years older, and they start a family. Did you know those statistics are included in teen pregnancies? If you give birth 3 months before your 21st birthday, you're listed in the national statistics as being a teen pregnancy. So whether you're a married woman who lives in, Provo, Utah, and, your husband's faithful to you and you're both going to college and you give birth to a baby, or you're a 13-year-old living in the ghetto and you get pregnant, you're listed in the statistics equally. So the thing is that we have a situation in which statistics can be made to lie. And take a look at how that changes people's perception. You come out with these things about 200,000 kids go missing or reported missing or something like that every year in the United States. It's not 200,000 people being kidnapped by some guy that you would see on depicted on one of these TV cop movies, okay? Most of the time it's kids not coming home on time, it's runaways, or it's a non-custodial parent taking liberties against whatever the court has ruled. But yet it makes us all terrified to the point that, you got neighbors reporting when the kids are unsupervised. And, this goes into the whole terrorism thing too. If you think about terrorism, you've got more of a chance. I looked this statistic up, and it happened to be associated with a particular movie star, won't mention his name, who at first everyone thought he committed suicide or something, and then it was later found out, or at least it was reported, that he was a victim of erotic asphyxiation, which involves a person, having a plastic bag on their head, being choked or hung as part of a sexual act. And the thing is, it just dawned on me, like, how common is this? I mean, so I looked up the statistic and it said, at least the page I found said around 500 people in America per year. 500 people. Wow, that is a lot of people. I mean, statistically, America has, depending on how you measure it, it has well over 300 million. But the thing is that 500, and then I started thinking, well, how many people have died of terrorist attacks and so forth, American citizens, both in and outside of the United States since 2001. And let's do some math here. 7,000 people have died of erotic asphyxiation since 2001, if the 500 figure is correct, probably underreported. But, how many people died? Right, 3,000 died with the Twin Towers attack, and then if we add in a few others that may have died, being kidnapped by ISIS or something like that, it's way below that. But yet everyone's scared of that. Sharks, your chances of getting eaten by a shark when you're swimming in the ocean is so very, very low. But I would actually, now not to get people scared, but I would probably think that more people die of these protozoans that can get into your brain. You've heard of those cases sometimes when people swim in warmer water in, places, I don't know, maybe in the South or in Arizona or something like that. And there's this amoeba, or whatever it is that gets into the brain and can kill you. I'll bet more people die of that than die from shark attack. But yet everyone is scared because they see it on TV and they imagine it could be them. Okay, so we live in a society where fear is big. And, one thing I would encourage people to do is look up the documentary, The Power of Nightmares. It's a BBC documentary. I think you can find it on YouTube. If not, it's on other sites. And just kind of watch it. Power of Nightmares Part 3. Very, very interesting analysis of how politicians and the media use fear in order basically to maintain power. Now, the thing is, this sets the stage for us getting really into this whole let's, protect each other from the big threat. And that's ultimately what censorship comes to. If our society has gotten to the point where we want to control, we want to protect the tribe, so to speak, from whatever terrorist threat is out there, be it individual or be it group, then that gives a mentality that we need to start invading on what everyone's doing, because it kind of bonds everyone, but that also makes the individual less important, and therefore the individual's desire for liberty and to live their life as they really want to live it is then at best maybe not really going along with the flow and not being a good member of society, or at worst, you become a threat yourself, in which people start thinking of you as maybe contributing to or being a terrorist. So this is something that we should really, really consider. And so censorship and the, fear and so forth go hand in hand. The reason why, for instance, people want to censor things away from their children is because they really, whether it's valid or not, they're scared their children will be affected. The reason why people want to censor, for instance, pornography, even for adults, is because they fear that people looking at this stuff may behave in the way that they can imagine that they would react if they watch this stuff all the time. So there's a fear that gets transcended onto each other, and therefore pulls people away from really supporting freedom and liberty and all those things and individual choice. So let's take a look at a few of the issues out there right now. One of the things that really, really got me into this topic was when I heard about a pianist, a Ukrainian pianist, who was recently barred from a concert because she'd made some Twitter comments. I'm going to be very general on this because I don't know all the particulars. You can look it up. But she was basically condemning the situation going on in Ukraine. And there were people who put pressure out to... Anyway, there was a situation in which maybe she was making some statements that people didn't like. You can look it up. Just type in, I don't have her name written down here, but just type in Ukrainian piano player band into Google, and you can find it. Now, I don't know how many people protested. I don't know how many people made a big deal about this. I saw one site in which it only showed 3 protesters. 3! I mean, come on, 3? Okay, maybe that's all the people they need, nowadays to be able to say, oh, this should be banned. But come on, when it comes to issues like war and who's right and who's wrong and that sort of thing, and what policies should Canada or the United States or whoever should be following, shouldn't an entertainer or anyone else for that matter have a right to be able to express his or her opinions? And then I looked on a forum in which people said there was, this was a forum that obviously was going to be critical of the Russians. And there was people saying, well, she shouldn't have her opinions. She shouldn't be able to express her opinions because she's agreeing with Putin. And I'm like, okay, well, I hope this is a very small minority of the population that may have certain vested interests themselves. I don't know. But come on. I mean, just because a person may have some opinions that are different than other people's, they should be banned from being able to perform. I don't think while they're performing the piano, they're making, political statements. And so, this is a really dangerous trend if we see this in the Western world. And I'm using the term Western world because, we live in an increasingly globalistic system in which basically the West tends to have a unified foreign policy, and often domestic policies follow after that. And I think that's one of the reasons why the United States, even though the European Union was created in large part to compete with the United States on equal footing, the United States supports the EU because it's so much easier to work as the United States to work within the framework of the European Union than it would be, for instance, to deal with all kinds of individual countries in which maybe this country here supports this one supports that. The group pressure within the EU is tremendous. So therefore, American government and foreign policy is aimed at supporting the European Union, even though technically they're supposed to be our competitors, because ultimately then it's easier to get our way. But, this whole thing about banning as a strategy, I mean, this to me is extremely dangerous. And, if you don't like this woman's piano playing, don't buy a ticket to go hear her play, or don't go to her website and don't, download any of her music or anything. Don't do those things if you don't support her. If you don't like the political views of a movie star, don't go to see his or her movies. Don't try banning his or her movies or writing to the directors and saying, if you go ahead and use this person in your movie, I will never go see your movies again. I mean, come on. That is absolutely ridiculous. There's movie stars that I absolutely, on politics, totally disagree with. Completely. But that does not mean I cannot enjoy one of their movies because they're playing a character. They're stepping into a role. It may as well be an avatar that they're using. It doesn't matter to me, what their personal views are. I might find it interesting if if they're playing a role that's totally different than who they really are, but it doesn't mean I'm going to want to boycott the movie. Now, this brings me to another issue. Now, we got issue. We are closer to nuclear war. And I don't mean maybe full-scale nuclear war in which it's all, everyone's going to be riding naked on a motorcycle with a mohawk and eating each other like some sort of weird Mad Max-ish type dystopian movie from the 1980s. But ultimately, we are closer to the use of nuclear weapons than we ever have been. I'd say even closer than during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Because, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, you had two of the big boys on the block who were, facing off each other. And, two big guys facing off, at least they're able to negotiate and come up with some compromises, which they did. However, nowadays we have a much more chaotic situation. And it's not that we have the diplomats of the same stature as John F. Kennedy running the show, okay? I mean, take a look at the current crop of at least the leaders of both the Democrat and Republican parties of the United States. They're not John F. Kennedy. They're not Franklin Roosevelt. They're not Harry Truman, and they're certainly not Ronald Reagan. They're none of those kinds of people. I don't even know if these kinds of people could have been elected ever prior to the 1980s. I really don't think they could be. But we've got them now. And, we're at a crossroads where we could have a nuclear war. And you know what? Do you know what the big issue is on everyone's mind? Freaking cakes. Okay? Cakes. And, it has to do with the whole gay marriage issue and so forth. It has to do with pizza parlors. By the way, who at a wedding orders pizza? I've never heard of that. Oh, well, there's different things. I mean, there's people that have naked weddings, but I'll get into that in a moment. But the thing is that let's take a look at this here. I remember there was a couple of years ago, I don't know how it ever turned out, but there was a case where a photographer who was Christian was asked to do the wedding photography for a gay couple. I think it was a lesbian couple. I don't know. It was a gay couple, lesbian, gay men. I don't know which. And they refused. And the government went after them. And, I don't know if they're still in business now because of this, but the government went after them. Now, first of all, I'll just back up here a little bit. If I was a photographer and someone came in and asked whether I wanted to do, if I would do the photography for a nude wedding. They have nude weddings. Where I grew up, there was a nudist colony nearby, and I remember reading an article about nude weddings that took place at this nudist colony. The thing is that these kinds of things do take place, and I'm sure there's photographers that are asked to do these. And, in the past, there was, anyway, the thing is that, there's, if you're going out and doing, photography, and if I was a photographer, I would go ahead and do the photography. Just cause I may not really get into that whole idea of what they're doing. To me, it wouldn't matter. I mean, if there's a couple, I don't believe in divorce, but if there's a couple that, are getting married, the man's been married 6 times and the woman's been married 5 times and they're getting a wedding, I wouldn't say, well, I don't believe in your, multiple marriages, so I'm not going to film it. I'm not going to take photography. Here's the problem, though. In the past, at least there was an assumption that I had a right as a photographer to say yes or no. Okay, and it wouldn't be a civil rights type of issue. If you look in the phone book of any even small town, if you look in the phone book for photographers, you will find plenty, okay? Oh man, how many people use phone books anymore? But anyway, if you do use a phone book, you look in the yellow pages, you look under photographer, and there's going to be a freaking bunch of them to choose from. Because photography is one of those things that many people love to do, and if they can afford the equipment, they do it either as a full-time or part-time profession. Okay, lots of photographers out there. It's not like you're not going to find a photographer in your community. So why not just, okay, well, you go to one place and they say, well, let's just say it's a nude wedding. And you go to one place and you ask them and they say, no, I'm a Christian. In the way I look at the Bible, I wouldn't do this. Okay, fine. Go across the street and ask the next guy or girl, and they may say the same thing, and then the next one says, sure, we'll come out, no problemo. Okay, so why not? Why not just do that? Do people have to suddenly either try to make a big issue out of something or see this as a violation of their civil rights if they happen to be gay and a person of whatever religion says they won't do their cake or their photography or any number of other things that they will make a I was going to say make a federal case of it, and it seems like nowadays they will make a federal case of these things, and that totally goes against freedom of choice. Okay. If I'm just wondering, would this be any different if it had, instead of a Christian saying no to a gay themed wedding cake or pizza or whatever it is or whatever, that it would have made a difference? What if it had been an Orthodox Jewish bakery or someone who was a Muslim asked to do this? And if we're going to get into that, we could play around. I think there's been a huge amount of videos now going out, where someone will go in and, claim to be from, want a Ku Klux Klan wedding or something and go to a black bakery and ask them to do the cake. And, in a lot of these cases, the people that are being asked to do the cake say no, which I have no problem with. If I was black and someone from the KKK wanted me to do something for their wedding or whatever, I don't think I would want to do that. That would go totally against what I believed in. And, the person has a right to say no to it. But not in our society today. It seems that this is not going to be someone's option anymore. Now, at first, it seems that everyone likes to go after the Christians and so forth, because for some reason in our society there's a perception that the Christians are the majority. So if you're of any smaller group religiously, you are fair. You are probably being abused in some way. And that goes into the whole idea of this. Some people call it cultural Marxism. I'm not a big expert on that area, and there's also some baggage that seems to go with a lot of the people that deal with cultural Marxism. But it's somewhat the idea that instead of, economic Marxism, which said everyone should be forced into a level playing field depending on their economics, instead we have a situation in which we have those who say that everyone should be forced onto a level playing field based on gender identification, sexual preferences, religion, did I say gender? I think I did. Ethnicity, or any number of other things. So, all of a sudden, we have a power dynamic, a perceived power dynamic, not maybe a real one, where all of a sudden what some of these people call white privilege, and, if you're If you happen to be white, then for some reason they feel that you have gained something without having really earned it, whereas someone else would have to work twice as hard to be able to attain the same thing you did. I would just remind people to take a look at a lot of the pictures from 1900 of kids working in coal mines, and in the United States, and talk to me about white privilege, or look at pictures in Appalachia today, or any number of poor areas of the United States today where there are people who are poor and they are white. And the only time those pictures ever get circulated amongst liberals is when they say, look at this community, it's 95% white and 60% of the people are on food stamps, as kind of a disparaging way to say, especially if it's a Republican state. Now, the thing is, I think this explains some of this reasoning, to where if you are a Muslim baker and someone comes in and they wanted to do something, again, like, a naked wedding or a gay wedding or, any number of other things, and, you refuse, it won't go viral. It won't be something that people will suddenly freak out about. But they will freak out about the whole thing if it's a Christian. And I really do think it does get into this whole power dynamic that is pushed by, the people that seem to espouse this cultural Marxist idea. And so ultimately at least I hope that conservatives can kind of understand where these people are coming from. Again, it has nothing to do necessarily with the religious persuasions. I mean, if you take a look at the conservatism of Islam and the conservatism of Christianity, I think Muslims are far more conservative and traditional than the average Christian in the United States. However, the power dynamic thing comes in, and then a Muslim could be blonde and blue-eyed. They could be from like Albania or parts of the Caucasus Mountains, or parts of Syria or Iran, and yet still it will be a power dynamic that will come into play here. And this is one of the reasons why you will see, the attention put on the Christians. However, my opinion still goes into the idea that if we have a system that's set up on freedom of choice, and a person being able to say yes or no to whatever, unless it's a critical situation, for instance, I would totally be against anyone saying that if you're a doctor and someone comes in and they were doing something you disagree with, or they come from a lifestyle or an ethnicity that you don't like, and you say no to treating them, I think that's something that you should be prosecuted under law, because you might be hampering their ability to survive, and you took an oath to help everyone. Okay? That's totally different. A baker does not take an oath to support any and all people's life choices. That's not in there. So why should they? And I would say that we should at least remember there is a certain level of property rights that we should respect. Now, again, some people are going to think, yeah, but what about if someone hangs a sign up saying, I don't want anyone here that's black, or I don't want someone here that's white, or I don't want someone Hispanic or Asian or whatever. There's a difference there in the sense that this has nothing to do with a person's personal religious or whatever choices that they have made. This is something that's a characteristic of the person, irregardless of all other things. And so I think there should be a difference in the way we interpret a civil rights issue. Again, why should a photographer or cake maker or any of these kinds of things that are not in any way, shape, or form a part of a critical service to the community or to the individual be under the strict, the point that they could get sued by the government if they say no? And what level should we be able to say no? I mean, what if a person what if a person, well, I could think of a number of things that could be offensive to various people. What if someone comes in, to your bakery, and let's say you live in a state where marijuana is legal, and they want you to make a big cake that has a big marijuana leaf on there in frosting, and with a phrase, something to the effect of "everyone get high," or whatever, and you don't agree with that. Should you have to do it? I think you should have a right to be able to say no. Maybe drugs have devastated your family. I'm not saying that marijuana has devastated anyone's family, but maybe drugs in general have devastated a member of your family, and you really do not want to make this cake. Or let's say you're a cake maker, but you only do it part time. Maybe the other job you have is a youth pastor, or maybe the other job you have is you're a substitute teacher in a school district. So how does that affect you if you have to make a cake that has a big marijuana leaf, if all of a sudden people are posting stuff on their Facebook saying, look at this wonderful cake we had for the dinner and it was made by so-and-so bakery. That could affect your job, your other job. So, you're probably thinking, yeah, but that's drugs. How is that the same as a civil rights type issue? Well, there are people that would feel that this is something that is close to them when it comes to their personal choices and their lifestyle, and this centers on it's part of their identity. But I don't care if it's something that's part of your identity. Again, it may come down to a person's ability to be able to say yes or no. What if you don't agree with polygamy? Now, I've done shows here where I totally feel that, polygamy should be recognized by the state, and so forth. However, the thing is, if you disagree with it and a polygamist comes in and wants you to do something, then why can't you be able to say, no, I disagree with this? And personally, if I came in and said I want a religious theme this or that, and the baker or photographer was atheist, and they say, wow, no, I don't want to promote your religion or whatever, I might feel like, oh, well, I'm insulted, but I mean, I can still go and find another person that'll do it and take my money. But instead, I think we're getting to this point where everyone's got to conform. We feel like, oh, come on, can't you just play the game? And so it gets little by little that everyone's going to have to play the game no matter what. And then when we do stick out and say we're a little bit different, if it's not something that's politically correct, then we're all of a sudden going to be aimed at as being the bad guy that has to be in some way curtailed by the society. Again, this goes back, like I said, to the pianist who was barred from doing her performance. And it had nothing to do with her talent. It was because some people complained because they didn't like her political views. Now, this whole issue, you might think, okay, well, this isn't going to be a really huge importance. Well, yeah, think about okay, I'm going to say something that does offend me, but I would not make it illegal. And that is that guy, those guys in Paris that did was it Charlie Hebrew, whatever it was. They did the thing with the cartoons where they poked fun at religions and various groups in society. Now, the problem there is that it made some people who were, that took offense because of the portrayal of Muhammad, and they went in and shot the place up. Now, I am in no way, shape, or form validating what they did. That was horrible, reprehensible. That is not the way to deal with controversy in a democratic society, or what passes for a democratic society today, that being France. However, or any, the United States for that matter. But anyway, the thing is that obviously free speech and free association, which I guess, businesses and so forth, that comes under free association, and free commerce should mean that these people had the right to be able to publish what they published without feeling like someone's going to come in and shoot them. But then again, I was just wondering if, I don't know what France's laws are in regards to incitement, or when it comes to sexual or religious, what would you call it, hate speech and things like that. But I'm just wondering if you were doing these same kinds of cartoons in other countries in Europe, could you have maybe come under got the attention of law enforcement, who might have come in and said what you're doing is against such and such statute against hate crimes, because you're poking insults at this one religion or that ethnic group. And in the United States, wouldn't there be maybe someone who would come in and say they were offended by these things? And maybe the way things are going now in America, that the American government could come in and say, well, yeah, you're violating this statute, and so therefore you have to do it. You have to get rid of it, or you're going to be fined, or whatever. So it is ironic that we have protest from the media and government officials in the United States about the curtailment, or the way that freedom of speech and association is being treated by extremist groups. And then at the same time, the government uses its own force to come down on people who they disagree with. They see, that's what I'm totally, if you want to protest, get this, if your baker, for whatever group you belong to, I don't even know, I make up something. I'm not feeling that creative in that sense right now, but let's say the baker won't do your thing, or the pizza person won't do your thing, or whatever the service is. The person doing your nail polish doesn't want to do your nail polish because they disagree with something about you. Have a protest then. Boycott them. Come out and say, get all your friends in your group to say, no, we're not going to do it. But come on, does the government have to be involved? You really need the force of government to come down on you. And then that gets me into some things that, if you take a look at where, maybe your ox isn't being gored on this. You don't care. You're not Christian, or if you are Christian, you don't care about this, or you're not gay, or you're not this, or this, or this, or this, or this. Think about, for instance, the other side of the coin. If you take a look at, if we take a look at some things out there that have to do with freedom of speech and presentation and even art. Now, I'm reminded there was some picture from the 1970s that was going to be part of a display about tennis, and it basically is a picture of a girl in a tennis outfit, and she's scratching her rear end, but she does it without, I don't know if it's posed or not, but she does it and doesn't realize that she's exposing her rear end, and there's a picture taken of her doing that, and it's sort of become this, some people describe as an iconic image representing tennis. Now, I don't know about that, but the thing is that some feminists complained about that, and it was not presented in this particular art or exhibit, or some sort of presentation about tennis. And that reminds me that in Sweden there was this picture. It wasn't even a picture, okay? It was a cartoonish drawing. And it was in some little small, Sweden's a little tiny, it's the size of California, but it has a really small population. So most swimming areas in Sweden you don't get very big crowds there. They're pretty small groups of people. But there was this one place where people could go swimming, and there was a sign about it, and it has a picture of a woman in the water, topless and waving or something like that. And again, it's not even a real picture. It's a cartoon picture Okay, it's done in such a way that, gosh, I don't even know if a person in Utah would find it offensive. But anyway, some feminists found it offensive though, and said it was part of the, I guess, kind of objectification of women or something like that. And the local authorities took it down because they didn't want to offend them. And you see, the thing is that if you have a situation, I remember there was something else about trying to make some sort of law about exposure. There was a petition drive. I saw it on my Facebook. Someone had about banning nudity or something like that in the community. And my problem with these kinds of things is sometimes you get, especially in America, not so much in a country like Sweden, because there are very, 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 very few really, conservative religious Christians. But in America, you see a situation where sometimes religious conservatives will get together with a certain type of feminists. Okay, there's some feminists, the feminists are all over the place. I think it's unfair for people just to say, oh, the feminists want this or the feminists want that, when there are some feminists that, for instance, feel one way towards, let's say, public displays of sexuality or nudity, and there's others that feel a totally different way about it. There's some that are very positive towards pornography, and there's some that are very negative towards pornography. But the ones that are negative towards pornography, often you'll see them get together with the religious conservatives, and they will start attacking something. I don't know whether it be a strip club and I'm not saying there's anything good about these kinds of things. I'm kind of staying neutral, but let's just say I don't go to these kinds of places, just to, into that. But the thing is, they'll go after a strip club or they'll go after pictures or something like this, and often they start using each other's rhetoric, even though they don't realize that, the religious conservatives don't really realize how much the feminists don't really particularly care for them, nor do maybe a lot of the feminists really realize how much the religious conservatives really don't care for them. But they'll work together on these kinds of issues, and they'll talk about all this stuff about objectifying women and so forth. And in a sense, they're sort of objectifying women themselves, because they're saying that these women, whether they, whatever they're doing, are in some way needing protection from the state, or else they will go out and earn money. They will pose naked, or they will dance naked, or something like that. So therefore, they need protection from the state. So isn't that kind of objectification? Aren't you saying that their right to do as they please in an economic sense is not really their right because you know better than they do? Now, again, you could deal with these kinds of issues on moral, like for a Christian conservative can deal with this on a moral issue. They can say, this is bad. This is something I don't agree with because they're doing this and this and this. Okay, fine. Go ahead and do that. No problem. If a feminist wants to come out and say, I disagree with this because of this, this, or this, fine, let them do it. But to use the power of the state is a very dangerous thing. And I would note that maybe the Christians should take a look at that. When you come in and ask the state to go after a business, for instance, even if it's a strip club, and you find some technicality to nail them with, what if those technicalities are then turned around against you later on? And, this gets right back to you use the power of the state and you become the victim of the state later on. Okay? Double-edged sword, just like those lessons I had back in high school, that the First Amendment and all these other amendments are a double-edged sword, because they can get you may wield in one direction, but they'll come back at you in another. So sometimes it's better to maybe be a little bit more pure about this. Maybe a purely libertarian approach is far, far better than one in which you let the state make decisions. Because, you let the state make decisions on these kinds of things and be the nanny and be the person who determines what's right and wrong. pretty soon you do get a situation where the school is telling your kids how they should dress or what they should be eating, okay, or what they can bring to school for lunch or what's appropriate for whatever. You have the school determining it, or photoshopping out, if your kid has a tattoo or something, photoshopping out the tattoos in the school album. See, the thing is, that's a danger. Feminists should consider this too, because maybe they go after one thing and then on the other hand, it gets turned against them. So if you are able to get rid of something that you feel is exploitive, maybe later something that you don't feel is exploitive, and you get charged under the same rules. Okay? Better to be able to express yourself and say, I agree with this or I don't agree with it, and to try to mobilize people with your viewpoint to educate and so forth, rather than to ban. Because once you start going down that road of, well, I don't like you, so I'm going to report you to such and such board or commission or something like that, then you are in big, yeah, sure, it's fine. Use it. It's sort of like the same thing if you decided that maybe in a biological warfare situation you use a bacteria on your enemy to win the battle, but then the bacteria comes back and gets your own population. That's the best analogy I can think of. So when you hear about these events in the news, and when you hear about people doing something you really don't like, or they this should be banned or this should be curtailed or whatever, at least before you jump on the easy answer, the one that's like, it's so much easier if they just stop them from being rude or explicit or nasty or whatever. Think about how that could be turned around and aimed at you later on, because that's something that I think our society is forgetting as it becomes more conformistic and more apt to say, hey, government's good. Let's trust Big Brother. Anyway, that's all for tonight, and I thank you for tuning in to this edition of Unlock the Door Radio here at UCY TV.
Homo sapien 2.0. According to a researcher at the Global Brain Institute, a completely new human species will inhabit the Earth in just over 30 years. Now, this evolutionary step could be comparable to the transition from apes to humans. Microchip implants will be placed in our ears and our fingers and make many devices completely obsolete. But this dependence on technology has its drawbacks, of course. In the future, humans are going to have to compete for jobs.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.TV.